on behalf of but on behalf of Learning General Surgery, the admin Dr.
Yeah,
Giridhar
you're on,
Sharma
sir,
and
now.
myself.
Thank you.
Can
Sir,
you hear me?
can you hear us?
Yeah, I can
Yes,
hear
sir.
you. Can
Yeah,
you
it's
can you hear me?
it's a great privilege to welcome you, sir, to this platform, and it's a great honor. And along with you, I welcome Dr. Deepraj Bhandarkar, Dr. Vishwarup Paul, and Dr. John Danakumar should be joining anytime now, and all others to this very special occasion. And I hand over to Vishwarup.
Sir, very
Good.
good evening.
Hi.
Hi, sir. I have been a student of Grant Medical College in anesthesia, and during this historical period, I was a first year resident. So I had list clinical responsibility during these beautiful procedures. You used to hand over your camera to me with Lina and Dipraj helping you in surgery, and I used to take photographs. That is what I remember. And since that is 30 years ago, so it has been, I'll tell you how this, I thought of this program. Incidentally, on 31st of May, Deepraj posted in his Facebook page with a photograph taken of that era with you operating in those that the early periods in month of May 1990, and that is 30 years down the line. I am an anesthetist. I have seen and all the developments of every field of surgery, every subspecialty. But for me, in my mind, the one technological innovation that has changed the paradigm, entire tectonic shift of surgical specialties have happened only because of laparoscopy. It started as laparoscopy, but after that it got extrapolated to every other organ system. It is at that time I spoke to Dipraj and thought we should revisit with Sir and from that time how that's journey. Today's younger generation in this country, lakhs of people are doing laparoscopy and other surgeries. But we would like to go back in time with you and start the journey from there during this period of conversation. And in between, because in this Learning General Surgery Forum, we have 25-year-old people who are entering MS General Surgery. We also have people who have spent 30 years in surgical practice. That is the entire age group. So it's a very enriching, it's going to be an enriching evening with your presence. So we will start with, sir, around that time, laparoscopic tubal ligation I used to see by another stalwart of that time, Dr. Bamsi Wadia. That used to happen in another building. It is around this time that you started. As an extremely young person, I didn't know what was happening, but today I look back and I thank the entire time. Please take us to the beginning, sir, with your insight. Sir, over
Well,
to you, sir.
thank you. Well, the beginning was in 1972. At the JJ Hospital, we had a sort of a tertiary care unit where we used to get a lot of referral cases, and we had such enthusiastic residents that they would cream the entire medical wards and bring interesting cases to our unit. Unit had a load of 20 beds allotted to us, and at any one time we'd have 70 or 80 beds because the meal would take 3 or 4 weeks to materialize. And I was wondering how we could improve the bed turnover. I saw, whilst I was waiting for my anesthetist, Dr. Bhagat, at the Breach Candy, Dr. Mukta doing a laparoscopy. And she asked me to have a look, and I realized that this is the way for early diagnosis in teaching hospitals. And that is how we got the equipment. And the equipment was installed and kept permanently at the JJ Hospital for the use of patients at the JJ Hospital so that we could have an early turnover and do surgery without an issue. And we did this. We did over 3,000 cases which were reported of diagnostic laparoscopy. The surgeons in the city had facilities of diagnosis and they were not particularly interested. when I went to the small towns, surgeons already were using the laparoscope because that was the peak of the family planning period in the early 70s. And they were doing tubal ligations. I went and told them that we can just turn the laparoscope up from the pelvis to the diaphragm. They were and they were so happy to start doing diagnostic laparoscopy. That gave me the opportunity to visit small town India, almost all over India. Very happy with diagnostic laparoscopy. So the big town surgeons used to make fun of it as sort of looking through a peephole instead of opening wide doors and going inside the abdomen.
Yes. Sir, go on. Sir, please go on.
Yeah. And from diagnostic laparoscopy, we were pretty. One thing I would like to tell all laparoscopic surgeons, they have never really looked into the telescope with the naked eye. They do that after dimming the light, otherwise the harsh light might hurt their eyes. They will be amazed at what they see because they're seeing in 3D vision, which they don't see at laparoscopy on a flat screen. And the sight is so amazing that it is wonderful. For that matter, Professor Kucheri and I, who started together, decided, he was also doing a lot of diagnostic laparoscopy. We decided to do it in the French position with the legs apart. So if necessary, we could sit down between the legs, look into the telescope with the naked eye like we were used to, and continue operating. And people will remember that is something we did during the first laparoscopy also.
Viswarup?
Dipraj. Hi.
Yes.
Hi. Hi.
I just want to say hello to Viswarup, Deepraj, and Tempton Urwadia. This is Leena from the UK, from Liverpool.
Leena,
Hi.
hi.
Nice to see you, Leena.
Hello.
Leena,
It's
hi.
fantastic.
I
Lovely
just
to have you
said
on,
that-
Leena.
Lovely. Hi. Thanks, Bandhu. Thank you for organizing this.
Lena, your daughter was supposed to come and sing. What happened?
Let's continue talking about you. I'll talk about my daughter with you later.
Right. So, sir, Dipraj, would you like to?
Yeah. So, could you tell us what were the challenges in those early days when we were doing the diagnostic laparoscopies? I mean, those were not called diagnostic laparoscopies, were called peritonioscopies those days. So, what were the challenges in terms of the equipment or in terms of the referral of cases? Because a lot of people didn't believe in this those days. So would you say that there were some people who helped you actively in getting your cases together in terms of that they believed in this technique as a valid technique?
Yes. Getting the equipment, I think I already said we had to, because the import duty was 340% at that time for all equipment. So we had to go to Germany, get it and smuggle it in. Between the layers of my wife's sari. But I had no compunctions of conscience because I knew I was going to use them for poor patients and not make any money out of this. But in terms of getting patients, I think we got the patients from the sheer trust and belief and loyalty of our residents. They would go through all the medical wards and look for any patient bumps which had any surgical possibility. And they would sort of get the, and then the physicians whose patients we saw realized doing some justice to their patients by doing fast diagnosis. And then the physicians started believing in us, especially 2 or 3 I would like to mention, Dr. O.P. Kapoor, Dr. K.M. Modi, Dr. Varzani. They believed in what we were doing and the physicians started sending us cases. And the day I did my very first diagnostic laparoscopy, I went into the surgeon's room. I was already in the JJ for 9 years, but I was not allowed to buy coffee because I was very junior. So that day I went and said, today I'm going to buy the coffee. And everybody said, is it your birthday? I said, no, today I did my first diagnostic laparoscopy. And Parik, who was a surgeon there, asked me, Udwadia, when will you ever recover your investment in this instrument? I told him, sir, I've already recovered it today when I did my first scopy. And that is how the diagnostic spread in JJ Hospital, but more important, in small towns in India. And believe me, at that time, in 73, 74, Surat was a small town. You know, what we call today are big cities were small towns. Salem was a small town. Siliguri was a small town. You know, and that is how it spread, and that is how it gave me a chance to interact with small town surgeons early in my career and get to respect them for the work they were doing so beautifully there.
Right.
Wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
Wonderful. Sir.
Sir.
Yeah, Kaushik.
Sir, I'm Dr. Kaushik Bhattacharya from Siliguri, sir.
Yeah, we have a surgeon amongst us from Siliguri. He's a good friend of mine, Kaushik Bhattacharya. He was in Chennai before. And
Yeah, I was in Chennai before, sir. Sir, I want to ask you only one thing, sir. When you started laparoscopic surgery first, and when we read the history of surgery, Eric Muhe or Kurt Sam, they had to face a lot of difficulty from the open surgeons, those who are doing open surgeries. Where you did you find any difficulty, sir, in convincing the open surgeons that laparoscopy is the best?
I had my own problems. I had my own fears, actually. The night before my first laparoscopy, I just finished dinner and I got a phone call from a surgeon 3-4 years senior to me, doing very well himself. And he said that for years you've been doing experiments on Professor Sen's dogs. Now you're doing an experiment on a human being and see what happens to you. At that time, I had not heard, I subsequently got to be a good friend of Eric Muhe, but at that time I had not heard that he spent 5 years in jail after his 87th patient had I have become a good friend of his, actually, because he told the whole story in detail.
Okay.
And, I had not heard of that. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have done the first case. I told my team, Deepraj and the rest of the team, that this is what I was told last night, shall we go ahead? And to the credit of my boys, they said, sir, go ahead, because we've been preparing for this. It's not that this was the first time we went into it. We had been preparing for 6 weeks, and I told them 15th of May is the deadline. After that, any case that comes, we do. And though I did my first, or we did our first laparoscopic cholecystectomy, I can tell you that I had already done, I'd never seen one, but I already done 100 in my mind before the first one. I would think of a short duct, a long duct, Meridzi duct. I would think of abnormal anatomy and do the whole operation in my mind repeatedly. I must have done 100 lap choles in my mind before we did the first lap chole. And that is why I was reasonably confident. And my confidence was so greatly boosted by my team that we went ahead. The whole procedure was an epic procedure because everything went wrong. In the first place, it was a horrendous bad gallbladder in an obese lady. The power failed. The fuse blew up because of the fluctuating current. I wouldn't have known what to do. Deepraj knew what to do. Then the diathermy machine, the cautery failed, so we had to borrow it from the next theatre. But we went through it, and there were times when I was not confident on the 2D vision. So I'd sit between the patient's legs, put my eye to the telescope, and do it the way I was used to for 3,000 diagnostic laparoscopies. And at that time, the stores had a beam converter, so that Deepraj could see on the screen what I was doing blindly. And that is how we did the first laparoscopic cholecystectomy. And when I told Kushcheri that I had to sit and do it, he said, I still sometimes sit and do it with my eye to the telescope. And that is how we started with that position. And I always continued with that position for all upper abdominal surgery. But,
but I think
like effort.
Yeah, that's the story of the cholecystectomy, sir. But would you mind sharing with everybody what happened exactly 1 week prior on a day which is so very special to you? And
Yes.
that
Yes.
case was even more challenging in terms of what happened to that patient post-operatively.
Yes.
You see, I said that we will, 15th of May, whatever case comes, we will do. I was hoping a lap chole would come first, but a lap appendix came first, so we did it. And that happened to be my wife's 50th birthday. And so we did it. And I came back at night after having a quick dinner. And I found that the boys were sitting with the patient because the patient was still not breathing, which was a terrible fear to us. Because anything going wrong with what was deemed experimental surgery would be a ghastly effect on us. But ultimately, the lady started breathing and everything went well. This is what I mean by saying that this surgery was not done by an individual. It was done by a wonderful team, the team of Ward 19A, JJ Hospital, where every resident, every intern, every nurse had a part to play in whatever we did. Mainly.
Can I just come in here?
And the anesthetist, sir, we have Dr. Khond amongst us.
I got a picture of her. She was
she was the person who anesthetized the first lap chole, and I think Viparup was there too as the resident.
Yes.
Yes. So I specifically wanted Dr. Khond to be coming on the screen, and both of you, because those days, today life is very different. Those days, end-tidal CO2 was just emerging technology. None of us knew what is prolonged carbon dioxide pneumoperitoneum. Dr. Khond, madam.
Could we have Dr. Kond's camera on the screen? Kaushik, would you mind turning your video off?
Yeah.
Madam Khond?
I'm just checking what name is she on.
No, she was
Dr.
there.
Sandhya Khond.
Yeah, Dr. Khond. Kaushik, would you mind turning your video off, please?
Yes.
Hello?
No, actually.
Madam Khond is muted. She's got her mute sign on.
What is the name, madam? What is the name written there?
She's got Galaxy J7.
Okay. Fine. Because I couldn't find the name. I'm just checking on that. Galaxy S6.
Galaxy J7 Max.
Okay,
J7
fine.
Max.
Just give me a minute, madam. I'll just.
There's Leena with her eidetic memory helping us out. 15
Leena.
seconds and it registered. Leena?
Yeah, Bandhu. It's just so good to see you guys. It's like completely coming back in time. I want to be back in Bombay and back in JJ with you guys.
No, not right now. After 6 months.
Yes, madam.
Hello. Can you see me now?
No, madam.
Yes,
what's your phone?
Yeah,
we can see you, madam.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very well.
Yes.
And thank you for sending me your photo.
Good evening to all of you. Hello.
Yes.
Yes, madam.
I would say hello.
Yes.
We can hear you, madam. Go on.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. The thing is, I would like to share few things with related to this particular case, and the technology. As I said, I would like to get acquainted with previous technologies on 90s when we barely worked with the workstation, which is very modest. Didn't have any monitors, didn't have any ventilators or vaporizers, and our battery of investigations. Hello.
Yes, please carry on, ma'am.
Go ahead, madam.
Yes, please. So the point to stress is working under the prevailing situations, and as sir has rightly said, the meager facilities and the resources that were available. I would like to add that nothing is particularly suited. All the resources, all these particular trends that suited that particular era, and that I feel was absolutely apt. Today, when I feel retrospectively, the conditions under which we anesthetized that case was very amazing. Today, after 30 years, anyone will question and doubt the prevailing situations under which we anesthetize. Today, no one will accept. But I would like to say that the trends. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, madam, we can hear you. Please
the
carry on.
trends, I'm sure, will be changing. Today, from 30 years from now, if you feel the trends will be totally different. And then you start wondering whether you applied the right standardized protocol. As sir has said, we didn't have any standardized SOPs, procedures, textbook. The first case that we were doing, we didn't anticipate the time, we didn't anticipate the blood loss. We exclusively for this particular case, we didn't even know what was the position which was best for the patient and the blood loss that I would be expecting. And moreover, what kind of complications I should expect. Nothing was documented. We were working in some sort of a samra scenario. And this, as he has rightly said, created an epic. Based on this, the extrapolation of his technique has now standardized, now written many textbooks and journals and articles on which we can base, on which we can depend to conduct the case. We didn't have anything. We didn't have any guidelines when we conducted this case. That is what it makes it a little special. That's what I wanted to share.
Well done.
Madam?
Yes, please.
As an anesthetist, I think I was absolutely keen that today I must have you on the screen to go back to that era.
Huh?
And as you said, that it was almost for us, it was the navigation without any GPS. We were more reactive than proactive because there was no means to be proactive.
Yeah.
Yes. So, sir,
if I can come in here, Professor, for a minute.
Please.
I would like to know from Professor, what was the preparation for surgery? Did you have videos to watch, or did you go watch another surgeon to do? Because, you know, whenever anything historical of this nature is put into practice, there will be a lot of rehearsal. What was...
I had never seen a lab coli before. But Professor Kusheri and I were friends because of diagnostic laparoscopy from 1975. And he did his first laparoscopic cholecystectomy in just a few weeks before me. And he couriered his tape to me. And the whole team studied his tape. I must have seen his tape 100 times before I did the cholecystectomy. So that is how I got my bearings on laparoscopic cholecystectomy.
Can I come in here? I'm Pradeep Kaul. I'm calling from, because I remember the details, how we prepared for this case.
Hi, Pradeep. How are you?
Hi, Pradeep.
Hi, sir.
Can we have Pradeep's video on?
Hi. Sorry, I moved away from laparoscopy, but I remember we had the oxygenators, the blue oxygenators, and you had carved out the biliary anatomy out of sponge. And to gain control in laparoscopy, you had put two matchboxes, one in the gallbladder fossa and one in the right iliac fossa. And we are picking up grains of rice from the gallbladder fossa, putting them down into the right iliac fossa and taking up matchsticks from the
Pradeep,
right iliac fossa and putting it back.
Pradeep, we had not just put grains of rice, we had put raw rice, cooked rice and overcooked rice so that we could get a haptic feel how much pressure to put on. So we are learning. That time the word haptics was not in the dictionary, but we started haptic fields before we started lap chole.
And when we did the dog experiment, we couldn't succeed because all the lobes were flopping down. We couldn't keep the multi-lobe dog liver out of the, it was masking the view. And we abandoned that. I remember 3.5 hours into the surgery, you used a swear word and said, let us just open it. But we said, no, let us persevere and carry on.
And what swear word did I use?
Maybe I'm at home now, honestly.
But why did you consider opening, sir? What was the problem that you decided to open?
This was a very bad gallbladder. And I was afraid that I might damage the right hepatic duct. And that is when I put my eye to the telescope, and that gave me the confidence to gently go on dissecting and get it off the right hepatic duct, the neck of the gallbladder. Because whatever happened, I didn't want to do any harm to the patient. Because this was not an ego trip, this was a surgical adventure.
And do you remember the rounds on the next day, so following day, when you came for rounds and we went to the female surgical ward, and you saw the patient sitting up?
Yeah. Deep, I wish we had taken a picture of that patient. No,
those days, taking a picture was a big event, sir. Taking a picture was not as easy as it is today.
But she was a fat fisherwoman lady with huge gold earrings, you know, dragging her earlobes down. She was more relaxed than we were.
Sir, I want to know, only one thing. You are doing the first lab chole. The situation is quite tense in the OT. How are you managing the assistants, sir? Dr. Deepraj and all these things. What was the instructions to them?
You see, we have been working for a team for almost 2 years, and we gelled so well. There were not much instructions, and I must say, Deepraj was holding the camera with one hand. With the other hand, he was injecting saline from a 50cc syringe to flush, because I had not thought of using the flask, saline flask, and he was sucking. So everything was, I mean, they were doing as much as I was doing, you know. It was a total team. And because we had worked a lot in open surgery, we sort of knew each other's anticipations. And even the first assistant was perfect. So the nurse was perfect, I must say that. She was not overawed by the situation. And once in a while when I said a crude, nasty word, she would take it in a stride. So it was a good team effort.
You never swore at the nurses, so you always call them sweetie. So that's how you got the work done.
But you know, I call them sweetie always. But when we gave a farewell to Branches, the theatre superintendent Brishkandi, she said, T always called me sweetie. But I knew that when he called me sweetie, he meant sweetie. But when he said sweetie, he meant a word starting with B.
Sir, did this make national news? Did it come to the newspapers? Was there
No,
some sort of
we
celebration?
did not make it at all public. We were not out for publicity. We did not make any national news. We just kept quiet and carried on. We were not out to gain unnecessary publicity. This was a surgical event. It was not a publicity event. And none of my boys even mentioned that it should be a publicity event, which is why I did them more.
But you are aware that is a national event.
It was not. Nobody knew about it till much later.
Yeah, but when did you bring it into the open to the rest of the surgical community?
I tell you, we had a session at Hinduja Hospital where we called a select audience of surgeons and not necessarily press surgeons, and we showed a video. At that time, editing a video, you know, what was that thing that it was like a big chocolate box the video was on?
VCR,
yeah. So to edit that VCR took me a long time, but I had a patient who helped me, and then we edited the VCR. It was about 15 minutes, Deep.
Yeah.
We showed it at Hinduja Hospital, and then it was picked up by somebody in the press. And I may tell you that I got a notice from the Maharashtra Medical Council for having it in the press. So I had to engage and reply to that notice that it was not I who had published it, it was the newspaper that had published it. So I'm glad I didn't go for publicity at all from any time.
Somebody from the audience has asked them, so that what were your instruments? Which instruments did you use for the first case? And could you tell us something about the subsequent laparoscopic cholecystectomies, which happened not only at JJ but at the other places in Mumbai?
You see,
If I can also add, sir, what were the technical difficulties you had faced in the first case or in the initial cases?
technical difficulties were extra surgical and surgical. Surgical was, it was a really bad, but extra surgical was the electric failures and all that. But the instruments we used were primitive. The size of the camera was about 4 inches by 8 inches. That was the size of the camera. See the cameras today, that was the first prototype camera, and the vision was not the best. But, and then for subsequent, I was, at that time I was operating 5 hospitals in Bombay: JJ, Hinduja, Bridge Candy, Pastor General, Masina, Railway Hospital, Khambale Hospital. So wherever I went, I had to take all the equipment with me. And it would just about fit into my small Fiat car. And this is how, and when I asked the hospitals to buy it, they said, no, in 2 years' time, nobody will be doing this, so we don't want to invest in this experimental surgery. So I had, the only set I had was mine, and I had to take it from hospital to hospital, which residents helped greatly to manage.
And if I may just add,
Deepraj in the car, the equipment in the car, half the equipment on our labs, half in the back, and Ramu the driver driving a small Padmini Fiat.
No, if I may add here, today, I mean, the instruments were Karl Stoss even in those days. But if you remember, sir, the instruments, the first generation of instruments did not have the rotating wheel.
No.
So you were not able to rotate the tips of the instruments as easily as we do now.
You have to turn your whole hand. Yeah. It's a pretty primitive set.
So Dr. Deepraj is the first official cameraman in India.
The first official laparoscopic cholecystectomy man in India.
Sir, since you didn't have a recording facility, how could you spread the technology? Because whoever has to learn has to come to your theater and see to learn.
No, we could record the thing on that box. Every single case I did and do today has always been recorded. We have not done a single case without recording. At that time, the recording was different. What we had preserved there all got fungus. I've got no records of the first case, of the first hernia. I've got no records at all. But we had done it. And at that time, it was recorded. And for about 2 years, we could show those records. Then the CD came and so on.
So who are the first group who you trained so that this technology could spread to 4 corners of India? How did the trainees come to you?
Can I
yes.
ask one question just before that, sir? We'll come back to that. But I just wanted to ask you, whenever something new, experimental, good or bad, even if good outcome, did you come across any adverse response from professional fraternity within India? And if so, did it change or affect your approach in any way?
No.
In the immediate...
Indian surgeons wrote in Lancet that anyone who just succumbs to the influence of the West in a developing country is unethical. And English surgeons wrote in the Indian Journal of that advanced technology is not appropriate for developing countries. And I had only one reply to both, that we are doing minimal access surgery in a developing country because the mass population in developing country are daily wages manual laborers. And if a technology can get a man back to work much faster it is a socio-economical boon and a specific advantage in developing countries rather than a disadvantage. That was my argument that I wrote back to them. But they had their point of view. I had no problems with them.
Dr. Radhakrishna, could we just unmute Dr. Ramesh Punjani, please? He wants to say something.
And then we'll come back to Radha's question.
Yeah, could we, if you could just unmute Dr. Punjani for a second?
Yeah, I have unmuted. Can I say?
Yeah, Ramesh, go ahead, please.
Sir, I was there even when this history happened of the first lab coli. And as we came out of the operation theater, in the waiting area, there was one surgeon, I would not name him. He just told me what happened. I said the gallbladder was removed through laparoscope. He said, if you can remove the tonsils from the rectum, is that the right way to do? So I'm just trying to say this is the sort of criticism that we all faced in the beginning. And sir, I think, I properly answered him, no, this is something new and which looks very interesting. He said, just wait till the complications come back. So this is how the people reacted to it in the beginning, but of course, eventually everybody accepted it.
But Ramesh, there is a sentence that in surgery, the truth often starts as blasphemy. And this is what happens in this is what happened.
Yes,
they accept the truth because it requires a little forward thinking to accept it.
So good evening, this is
Hi
John.
Ramesh, nice to see you. Hi John.
Sorry sir, I was a bit late because I had some trouble getting in. So I want to ask you also, not only that every new thing that we do clicks, not only, it may not even click. For instance, do you remember, you were doing the lap lift. You are very keen on lap lifts, laparoscopic, lap lift without the air, without using carbon dioxide. You wanted it to go to the rural areas, but somehow it never clicked and we backed off. So it's not that everything we do clicks. Sometimes when it doesn't click, we have to back off. Don't you agree, sir?
Yeah, but for the first few years, there were surgeons, particularly in North India, who were using atmospheric air. But then the medical legal aspects started bugging them. And I also advise that I have been using atmospheric air for diagnostic laparoscopy because I was using a sigmoidoscope pump for diagnostic laparoscopy. I could not afford an insufflator at that time.
True, sir.
I only advise them, particularly one Sharma in Kashmir, in Jammu.
Yes.
I advise him that please switch over to CO2.
I think the two people whose names come to mind when we talk about the gasless laparoscopy are one from Mumbai, Dr. Anand Nande. He had designed a special pulley system to do the gasless. And of course, Suresh Deshpande from Kolhapur, who designed the swarm system for the gasless laparoscopy. So these are the two stalwarts of gasless laparoscopy from the country.
In South, we had made our own also, Deepraj. There was an origin, that's a foreign thing, that was prohibitively expensive. Just like, the smoke evacuators we have. Anything that comes from abroad is very expensive.
Dr. Jai, a gynecologist at Hinduja, was using that system.
Vishwarup, you want to take this forward now?
Yes, I think the Patta can come in that after this, in the initial three years. Patta, would you like to reframe?
I remember those years. One of the main discussion in the ASI will be laparoscopy versus open. And there are so many senior surgeons who are very much against laparoscopy, which included one of my bosses there. And he said that, you don't have the feel of the organ. And if anything happens, everything major happens. And there are a lot of resistance. I just want to hear from Professor Udvadi as to what sort of opposition or what sort of how people are against this technique all over and how he could face that and how he could defend himself, because he doesn't have any other group to support him to start with.
Let me tell you, the surgeon who phoned me the night before surgery, my first surgery, saying that see what happens if something goes wrong, was the first surgeon to register for the first workshop we had at the Hinduja Hospital. So what was driving them was patient demand. Ultimately, the professors never accepted it for a long time. That is why, sadly, the teaching of laparoscopic surgery was not at the university and teaching hospitals, but at the private hospitals, because the professors thought that it was below the dignity to do a laparoscopic surgery that way, gallbladder that way. So ultimately, it was left to non-teaching surgeons to spread it. And we spread it by going all over the country, and we'd have about 6-7 people in the theater, and the whole about 50-60 people watching it from outside. Most of them would come to watch it like it was a circus event, but many got on to it, and then they came for training to Hinduja or to British Candy.
And how could you deal with the opposition, sir? Because in a conference, you would stand up and say, now, these are the advantages and you are wrong in what you're saying. But were you very diplomatic in saying that, or you were outright saying that this is what it is?
I'm a combination of diplomacy and harshness. And, but I would put my point across very clearly. And I would say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the person who is eating it is the patient. So go and ask the patient.
Sir, and not being a surgeon, I have a question. You mentioned a very crucial point that you did this surgery 100 times in your mind. And also as a team, you have, I mean, a huge number of experience of open cases. Now, as an anesthetist, I have thought in recent times, when I see a young surgeon who has grown up and brought up only in laparoscopy environment, when they by chance, in some case and some situation, one needs to convert, do you think there could be a gap, or do you advise adequate open surgical exposure before embracing laparoscopic surgery, or equal proportion, something like that? That is the thought I thought of asking you.
You see, I have been doing surgery for almost 60 years, and I'm convinced that no surgeon could be a surgeon without doing open general surgery. I'm convinced of that. That is the main trunk of surgery. Everything else is a branch from the main trunk. General surgery is the foundation, and from that, you see, Deepraj had a lot of general surgery. And I would ask my registrars, when I thought that they were very good, to go to the Tata Memorial Hospital as a finishing school, because that would also give them a lot of open general surgery. But if you have not done a bad gallbladder open, and you suddenly, for the first time, have to do it, I think you should do it in your mind 100 times before you do it for the first time.
I'll ask Dr. Giriraj Sharma to come in here. Dr. Giriraj Sharma. Sir?
Sorry, Biswas, can I just add to that? I was Sir's registrar, and I was already in the UK. Hi, Biswas. And I wanted to send a trainee from here who was Indian to train with Sir to do lab collies, because he's being very modest. You asked about publicity. He was one of the first 4 in the world to do it. So there might not have been publicity in India, but the rest of the world knew that he was amongst the first 4 to do it. And when I asked him about training one of the trainees from here, the first question he asked me was, has the trainee done 100 open gallbladders? Because if the person hasn't done 100 open gallbladders, I don't want to take them on and train them to do an open. So I think it was very clear that Sir's training rules were as strict as his own principles when he was operating. And I think that's where the West went wrong, and everybody was doing it without proper training, and we had a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's quite true, Leena. Absolutely.
Sir, if I remember those early 90s or late 90s, I was working under Professor Nandi in the All India Institute. There were too many bile duct injuries of all sorts, into the hilum, deep into the hilum. There are actually, we realized that many surgeons, got overconfident and overdid it. What is your take on that?
I think that bile duct injuries at laparoscopy are far worse than bile duct injuries at open surgery in the first place, because they're much higher. That's the first thing. Second thing is that if they're not treated adequately, they're a disaster. And there is a lesson I learned when I was a fellow with Professor Kurt Sem, who was a gynecologist in Kiel, when I was doing diagnostic laparoscopy. He taught me that there is no safe laparoscopy until it is safely completed. So there's a sense of caution, apprehension in every laparoscopic surgery. You see, I'm not much of a religious man, but whenever I scrub for laparoscopic surgery, whilst I'm scrubbing, I desperately say my prayers, because you never know which laparoscopic surgery is going to go into trouble. And you can never say that I've done enough. My first bile duct injury was after I'd done well over 1,000 cases. And sadly, it was when 3 surgeons from Cambridge, I had gone there as a training fellow for their workshop, and they had come and they were there seeing it, and they were egging me on, go on, you're doing it very well. And then I cut the bile duct and I said, you bloody assholes, I cut the bile duct. So you can never be sure when you're going to do it. And I think the important thing is, if you cut the bile duct, go on telling everybody that I've cut the bile duct. After, for a long time, that's the best way of minimizing bile duct injuries. Never hide them under the carpet.
So, I just want to, can I just say something, Deep?
John, please go ahead.
But I just want to tell you, I remember the very senior prof in South India was totally against lab colis. But the path of a pioneer is always studded with problems. Professor Udvadia, when he started, I'm sure, he started very well. He did say his prayers, as he said, a lot of careful, slow dissection, but we don't know how the hell to do the operation. Now we have, this angle, that angle, and he was only used to talk about only this elephant trunk at that time. I still remember. It's mainly the elephant trunk. He was hugging on to the gallbladder. Now we have so many things. We know where the cystic arteries, we know the triangle. There are so many ways, Ruvius, sulcus, so many things. They were not there before. They're all in the books. So the path of a pioneer is always more difficult, and he will have enough complications. The people who train with him are not bad surgeons, but they will have complications. And I also want to reiterate that somebody who criticizes us at that time, it's not necessarily enemy, because these are genuine guys on the other side who feel this is a bad operation, because they see the complications of enthusiasts, young fellows who get into these complications. Also, at the same time, I want to really, many people stand behind you, pat your back, and say, good, you're doing well. They're really nasty fellows because they go behind your back and bite you. When you have one CBD, they'll say, he has got a CBD problem, which is impossible to manage. So somebody who agrees with you doesn't necessarily become your friend.
John, at that time, there was only a 0-degree telescope. We never had a 30-degree telescope to start with.
Very true, sir. And pretty cloudy one too.
Yes.
Beaten up 0 degree.
Well, if I can ask Professor Udvadia, many would have flocked to you when we were doing this procedure. And when they wanted to start on their own, what was your advice? Because you can't be there hand holding them to do. And they have to either see a video or read your book and do. So what was your advice? Did you suggest any special training or go elsewhere and learn?
When they came to us, came to Hinduja or to British Candy, they saw a fair amount of it. They were scrubbed for a fair amount of it. And I think the very fact that they came showed that the gumption and the self-confidence to start off. And I told them that do it in your mind constantly, And I think any surgery, I think if you do it in your mind, often I used to tell, like Ramesh Punjani, he was washing up for vagotomy GJ with me. And I said, Ramesh, have you done this before? And he said, yes. So I said, when? And he said, I've done it many times in my mind, because that is what I would tell my residents to do.
Yes, sir, I remember.
Yeah, Ramesh.
Yes. You kept on saying that you have to do 100 times in your mind. While washing up by the side, you told me, I said, I have not done a single. He said, in your mind, I said 100 times. I said, then you will do it. So that was the message that you always gave us, that you have to do.
I think this is a very good learning method to do the procedure. Like in my mind, I set up the arrangement of the gas tube, the light tube, the diathermy arrangement. Until today, I am using the same arrangement over 30 years because it was most appropriate. So we had thought over every minor detail before we went into the first thing. Deepak even thought of getting a 3-plug new, because the JJ.
So we talked about bile duct injuries, and bile duct injury for a surgeon is in one sense a failure. So would you say that
every sense of failure?
Yeah. So would you say that surgeons need to learn from their failures, and what would be your approach to failure in life, either a small one or a big one? How would you approach failure? What would be your advice to the young surgeons when they face failure?
I think there are two things in failure. One is that you must admit that it is your failure. Don't blame the anesthetist, don't blame the assistant, don't blame the diathermy, don't blame the light. The failure, if it occurs in surgery, the buck stops with the surgeon. The surgeon must be the cause of the failure and accept it. And the second thing, please don't hide your failures. The first duct failure I had, I publicized it all over Bombay that I have had a bile duct injury. And that is one way of minimizing a recurrence of that injury, when you are ready to tell everyone that, look, I have this. Never hide it under the carpet. That is a terrible thing to do. And failures are a great learning curve. When I failed in my MS exam, I realized that I failed because I deserved to fail. The moment you realize that you failed because you deserve to fail, the whole angst, the whole terror of failure goes away. And when I appeared for my pilot exam, I did a beautiful flight. And when I got out, I put my hand out thinking that the wing commander will say, congratulations. And he put his hand out and said, doctor, you have failed the test. I said, it was a beautiful flight. And he said, yes, but the sequence of events, you had to say, before the flight, you almost acted as though it didn't matter. And then he told me that being a pilot is much more than flying. The sequence of events that you had to read out was the safety. And then I realized that it takes much more to operate than to be a surgeon. What we call today
checklist.
Checklist, yes. The checklist I read out in a hurry. And that's what, and the second time I went for my pilot test, I read the checklist for half an hour and I had a horrible flight and I passed. And also when my thesis was rejected, I failed. And when I failed, and Professor Sen was thrown out as the PhD guide, I went and told him that, sir, I'm sorry, we have failed. And then he said something which I think is very important for all failure. He said, Udwadia, success is not a destination. Success is a journey. You failed in the PhD, but we had a 4-year successful journey doing this. So there is many ways we look at failure. But failure, even a wound infection is a failure. Come on. Leaking anastomos is a failure. Any surgical complication is a failure. So we have to live with failure, surgeons. And the best way is to say it is my failure and tell people that this is what went wrong and the chance of repeating the failure are much smaller.
Sir, you said about your bile duct injury. Did you repair your own bile duct injury or you called for help?
That one we drained, and I must tell you that though I have had in my total 2 bile duct injuries and 1 right hepatic duct injury, I must have repaired at least 30 to 40 hepaticobiliary anastomosis, jejunobbiliary anastomosis of bile duct injuries referred. So I was very confident repairing bile duct injury because I had a lot of experience of referred patients, especially from 2 units in Bombay Teaching Hospital. And I let it settle down. I tied the upper duct, upper end, so that it would dilate. Let it heal, and we repaired it primarily ourselves. And I must say that all 3 patients of bile duct injuries that we had have done well.
Sir, did you put up a dictum that unless until you know how to do a bile duct injury repair, you should not do a lap chole?
No, I have never put that dictum up. I think that would be very unfair to a rural surgeon because he would not be able to do. But the important thing is that he should recognize it, drain, and refer to a tertiary care unit. You see, the patient's safety is more important. I would not expect somebody in a tribal area to do a hepatico-jejunectomy. But I would expect him to put a drain and save the patient. I've never made that dictum.
Sir, when did you move from gallbladder to other areas?
Why did I?
When did you move from lap chole to lap other surgeries like?
I have not moved much to lap other surgeries. Let me tell you, the first 2 years after the lap chole, I was traveling at least 1 to 2 weekends a month all over India, trying to spread lap chole, lap appendix, basic laparoscopy, because I felt that the purpose of laparoscopic surgery was not to do it in just major tertiary care hospitals, but to make sure that the benefit of surgical advance should reach every Indian patient and every part of the country. And that is why I dissipated a lot of my time in doing this.
You used to take Dr. Deepraj along as a camera person?
No. Deepraj was too busy doing his own thing. Deepraj then had gone to England for some time. By the time he came back, he was a big shot. He was asking me to hold his camera.
I think,
sir, I want to ask you something. Hello.
Yeah, Kaushik.
Yes.
Sir, I want to ask you something.
Yes.
You finished the first lap chole and you didn't publicize it, as you say, you didn't go to the media. When did you think of publication, sir? Did you think of publishing that, or did you publish that first case?
I did better than publish the first case. I did the first case in May. In December, I wrote my book, Laparoscopic Cholecystectomy. I saw it recently, and I do believe it is a beautiful book. I, read it all over again, and in the preface, there is a sentence that laparoscopic cholecystectomy will possibly be the springboard for resection of the liver and the bowel. This was predicted when people were not believing in laparoscopic cholecystectomy. It was predicted in the book written within a few months of doing the first laparoscopic cholecystectomy. So rather than publish in papers, I wrote a book which I think still is a good book.
So talking about publications, did you have it easy when it came to publishing your series of the first 100 cases, or did you face any obstacles from the Western world to get that paper published? Would you like to share that with us?
No, there were not many obstacles, but I wanted to publish it in an international journal.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they did accept it.
Yeah, but the BJS, if you remember,
they were wondering if the figures were fudged, what it was. But one very good thing happened, that there was an article which came out of 40 surgeons' results. And my results were published in that article, which was published in 1991. So they had accepted me as one of the early people.
So somebody from the audience has asked us, sir, that what was your inspiration in the early days when you were doing laparoscopy, or for that matter, your surgical career? Who would you say have been the people who have inspired you? And how have you kept yourself motivated all along to do what you've been doing?
I was very fortunate in my teachers, in my role models. Dr. Baliga, Professor Sen, my father himself. And I was also inspired by my residents because they kept egging me on. They were having a nice time seeing what would happen if everything went wrong, but they enjoyed it, and they, with their loyalty, with their enthusiasm, were a great driving force. They were young and they wanted to do more.
Bishwaroop, anything from you?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, Bishwaroop.
So if I just summarize last 10 minutes of Prof for all of us, all doctors, the surgeons, that experience is not an automatic entitlement. I mean, what I mean to say is just because I have gone through 100 cholecystectomies, it doesn't automatically become my experience. I do have to visit, revisit, analyze, and then proceed. So sometimes we use the term experience, like Prof said, rehearsing mentally before. I'm sure Prof was revisiting his in every operation, even now he does. And that is how we create experience. It's a process of creation rather than automatic entitlement, just because I have been through the events. Is that what take-home message for?
Absolutely. There is no such thing as experience. Each case is a new case.
Sir,
John wants to ask something.
Yes. Yeah, John.
Sir, I just want to ask you, everybody is very good at an interview, but knowing you since 1993, you have been very different. You are very different from others. You are friendly. Your temperament is excellent. You encourage, at that time, I was a youngster. You encourage youngsters like me, even from South India, to focus more and more surgery. You used to look forward to meeting me, and me really likewise, though you are a star and we were nothing at that time. Now, what makes your temperament so good? It's not being a surgeon, because most surgeons at that height look down on the others. You never did. What is it in your life? Is it your parents? Is it your family? Is it your religion? Is it your school? What is it? It's not, I'm sure it's not assistants and seniors.
John,
Yes,
John, I have never felt that I'm at a height. If you remember, once in Nagarcoil, I got angry with you for not me to show how you were doing an umbilical hernia, and that was almost 30 years back. You remember, John?
Yes, sir, very clearly. And we were operating at 3 in the morning, all the dirty cases to give you nice cases to do, and you're so angry with me, livid. What makes you different, sir?
John, if I can continue a question, because there are so many pioneers in India and so many things, but then there's stood many kept to themselves, and people have to visit them. I mean, there's somebody who has to travel to all corners of the country, trying to initiate and trying to teach is something not very commonly seen without any special interest.
I had a special interest, actually. You see, my special interest was that I was fascinated and made humble by the rural surgeon. If you see the conditions in which they work, the valor with which they work, the commitment, the sacrifice, I would like a cup of tea. The commitment with which they work. I would go at my expense with my instruments. And very often, Mr. Ajmera would bring a set of equipment from stores for my visit. And it was a joy to visit India. It's a beautiful people you get to meet in small towns.
One more question, sir. So far as the youngsters are concerned, they all have a very hectic life. Everybody wants to do well in their professional career. Would you have any words of wisdom for them so far as striking work and life balance is concerned? And what would you say to them, that how do they achieve that sense of balance?
This is very difficult. When we get so involved in our work, I think the surgeon's family is the first family to suffer. And by and large, I think our families are so accommodating, so ready to, there's a question in front of me, so ready to help you. Like my wife could easily have said, why are you going every twice a month weekend away? But they were nice and they permitted us to do this, with the result that the family did in the end. If I had to live my life all over again, I'd spend much more time with the family. Let me put it that way.
Sir, I have a question about your about the youngsters training abroad. For instance, you were Hunterian Professor of Royal College of Surgeons of England, 84-85, and again Sir James Ross Lecturer of Edinburgh in 1992. What would you say is the difference between somebody getting trained in surgery in India and in UK?
You see, at that time, going for the fellowship was a done thing. The moment I finished my fellowship, I came back. But I was a professor at JJ, and at that time, there was no Google, no internet. I could only teach from what I read. And the residents could also learn from what they read. That is why I had a method of going every year, because I felt you could learn much more from a person than from a book. And for 10 years, I went on doing this, whether it was in England, in Leeds, in Scotland, in America, in Sweden. For example, I spent 3 weeks with Liechtenstein, which was wonderful, or 3 weeks with Starzl. But the idea today is that the Indian training, the Indian volume of work makes it totally unnecessary for anyone to go abroad for training. But I think it is a good idea to go abroad for broadening your mind. If nothing else, if you go abroad, you will come back and treat your theatre nurses and all your nurses with much more respect, affection, regard than what most Indian surgeons treat their OR nurses. So there are many, but I wouldn't advise anybody to go for training, because the training they get here is perhaps the best in the world. The volume of experience they get here is the best in the world. So to go for training, I think, is a waste of time.
Lina wants to ask you a question, sir. Could we switch Lina's voice on? Yeah, Lina.
Hi, Prof. I just wanted to ask you, when you spread the expertise all around the country, how did they manage to afford the equipment? How did they manage to get the equipment in? Did you have any part in helping them get the stuff?
I would just tell them to get the optics the best, because you can only operate on what you see. All the instruments were Indian. So basically the cost was minimized to a telescope and a camera.
Sir, if I can ask you, you tried spreading the technology mainly in the rural areas and in sort of a corporate or private sector. Did you have any resistance when you tried to do that in the government sector? Because it took a long time for the government sector to take this technology, maybe 2 decades after you really started it.
Not 2 decades, it didn't take quite 2 decades. But I think JJ started quite early. Today, I think one of the best laparoscopy setups in here is at the JJ. They are always getting first prize at the SAGES meetings. So government has picked up very well, I think, by now.
But it took quite a while because...
yeah, but that is government machinery.
And there's also a lot of resistance from senior surgeons of that period of time, that they didn't want to try something new, which they didn't want to venture into, they didn't know.
But that didn't really stop the snowball effect of laparoscopic surgery, because there are always the young people, and believe me, laparoscopic surgery is patient demand more than anything else.
So what are the things?
Not on the technical aspects of surgery and other things. What are your thoughts on for the young surgeons, for them to be able to develop their communication skills, writing skills, speaking skills, presentation skills? Do you think that forms a very important aspect of a surgeon's overall persona?
I think communication is half the battle. And I think the first place where you learn to communicate is with your patient. That is where communication in surgery starts. And that sadly is becoming a lost art. Because if the patient today comes and the whole sack full of investigations on your table and expects you to just see the investigation. And when I say remove this sack, put it on the floor, and I want to talk to you, they think I'm a weirdo. But then they realize that just by the method of communication, where you learn to ask questions which will lead you to the diagnosis, you don't need to see a lot of investigations. I think that is an art which should be redeveloped, because that is the starting point of communication. And then we come to communication in terms of talking with your co-residents, with your residents, with your anesthetists, with your colleagues. And that is also a form of communication which develops into surgical communication. And then you go on to teaching. And I think the best way of communicating at teaching is to practice your lecture at home, practice your clinical presentation at home, and then you will gradually get the confidence of doing everything extempore. As far as writing is concerned, I think I've written about 70, 80 papers, 40 in books. Yeah. But the purpose of writing, according to me, a paper is to educate yourself. I don't expect many people to read what I write or learn from my write. But when I write, I know that I am an authority on that subject. I wrote duodenal perforation, 300 cases, when I was a registrar at the KEM. And I knew that I was a total authority on it because that paper was abstracted in the yearbook of International Yearbook of Surgery. So you don't have to be a known author, but when you enjoy what you're writing and you think that you're going to learn from it, automatically you will end up with a very happy, satisfactory article. So the purpose is that you must want to write on that article. Don't write because, publishing is, or perishing is the thing. Right? If you think you got enough interest and reason to write an article, and then you will enjoy it and research it. I think it is necessary to write. That's a part of growth.
Sir, one of the major issues in laparoscopy in India is lack of structured training centers. In spite of the volume of laparoscopy that goes on, every surgeon who passes out has only one question: where will I learn laparoscopy? There are centers which are 3-day courses, 2-day courses, but why didn't the IRCAD start a center in India?
We had a lovely center in Bombay called CMAST, which I think was very well run. Good center, and sadly that is closed down. That people who had been to IRCAD and then came to CMAST said that CMAST was a better training center than IRCAD. It lasted for about 8 years. We trained more than 8,000 surgeons in almost every specialty, whether it's neurosurgery or orthopedics or whatever. But sadly, it has closed down. But there is definitely a need of a structured training center. And if more teaching hospitals were to take this up as a method of education, it would be wonderful.
Sir, as we are entering the last quarter of this conversation, it's been already nearly an hour and a half. I wanted to ask you, sir, you mentioned in your original book, the first book, that this lap chole will form the springboard of many other advanced surgeries. Now, over the last 30 years, laparoscopy that concept did not remain confined to abdomen. It has expanded to other areas. They're all extrapolations. within abdomen, we have technological advances up to robotics. So I have two questions from my side as non-surgeon. One, did this growth, was it there in your line of vision, or it is less or more than your anticipation? Question number one. And question number two, would you like to make any such further prediction today for next 20 years, where all it can go?
Okay. In terms of abdomen, it was totally within my prediction. I knew that ultimately, with improving technology, improving equipment, whatever can be done at general surgery in the abdomen will be done by laparoscopic surgery. And that is what I wrote in the book. I never visualized that it would go into neurosurgery. It would go into every form of surgery.
Exactly.
What we were teaching at our training center, neurosurgery or arthroscopy, whatever. Today, there's no part of the body left, whether it's the nasal sinuses, the cochlea, whatever. Every part is laparoscopic. But when you talk of next 20 years, may I give my prediction?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
The greatest truth in surgery is that surgery is change. Surgery will change. It took thousands of years to go from open surgery to laparoscopic surgery. But now things are moving at a breakneck speed. One of my greatest mentors is John Hunter. 350 years back, he wrote that operating on a patient is like a savage taking by force what a wise man will take by stratagem. And he also wrote that with advancing knowledge, not surgery, with advancing knowledge, surgery will become knifeless and bloodless. And today, laparoscopic surgery will keep advancing. In the lifetime of many young surgeons, which includes Deep and someone, you will see that surgery has taken a total change. With nanosurgery, with whatever, with genetics, molecular biology, invasive techniques, surgery will come to a stage where it will not be what you are seeing today. And perhaps laparoscopic surgery is just a stopgap between general surgery and the future of totally non-invasive surgery. I feel that that is going to happen. I won't see it, but you will definitely, the younger generation will definitely see it in this lifetime.
When Anand ne बोल नहीं ये निकलने का कैसा?
जी?
Sir, if I may ask you, many young surgeons are interested.
Live है सर्जन बात कैम्पटन उजियार का ये है आनंद का फोन है.
Yeah, may I request everybody to keep their mics off, please?
Sir, many young surgeons in our platform Learning Journals are interested as to what is the schedule in Dr. Udwadia's life about 30 years ago, what is daily schedule and what is it now? How does he spend a day? In heydays and now.
When I was in peak practice, I would leave house at 7 o'clock and return home after 10. Because I was at 5 hospitals and pretty active. Today, let me tell you, according to me, a surgeon's peak is between 55 and 70. That is when a surgeon is at his peak.
That's very encouraging, sir.
Because his cognitive skills have developed to such a extent, his experience has developed, his brain computer has got everything in it, and his hands are still good. So 55 to 70 is a surgeon's peak period. At 70, he remains at a plateau depending upon how fit he is mentally and physically. And then in the late 70s, he starts coming down.
What is the schedule in a day now?
Now,
three months ago, sir. Not now. 3 months ago.
Okay.
3 months ago, I was operating at the Breach Candy and the Passy General. I had cut down to only 1 operation day a week, and I used to have 3 OPDs, at Breach Candy. I was spending a lot of time at the training center CMAS, which was fascinating because it was a joy to train surgeons and joy to see so many faculty in all various specialties so committed to giving their time and effort and energy towards training. They loved to teach. And that was one of the joys of being at CMAS, because almost 90-80 faculty we had in various specialties were all exemplary teachers.
And where did golf fit in, sir?
Golf?
And flying.
I have a commitment that if golf interferes with work, give up work.
How about piano, sir?
Hmm?
How about piano?
I'm playing the piano now.
And I just want to mention, Dr. Udvadia's mother was an FTCL. That's the highest degree now present in music. And she was an FTCL at that time. So I just have a question to ask you, sir. Do you have any regrets in professional life? Do you feel, I could have done this, but I didn't do it? Maybe if you're born again, I'll do this in surgery as a surgeon. Do you have any regrets not having done anything?
I have regrets in not publishing 3 works I've done very well. One was the changing face of abdominal tuberculosis, which I studied at the JJ from 63 to 73, 73 to 83, 83 to 93. How abdominal tuberculosis has changed over 30 years. That article I presented many times but never published. Then an article on giant hernia, where I used to insufflate pneumoperitoneum to pre-op prepare the patient, and had my own method of release. So these are some of the things I regret.
So another thing is,
I also regret not doing advanced laparoscopic surgery, but then I couldn't do everything.
True.
At that time, I was also very busy with surgical societies, the International College, IIGS, the SAGES, the International Federation, IFSES. So I had many things on my plate working together at that time.
Another question in different direction, sir. If you had not been a surgeon, what would you have been?
A pilot.
Right.
Yes.
Biswarup, with your permission, can I open the floor for questions?
Please.
If anyone
Please,
wants,
Dipra,
Amaravani, you want to ask a question? Anyone from the floor? Yes. Ask Professor Udvadia.
While we wait for the questions, there's just one final question which was asked from the audience also, and I had it in mind. Today we are facing a very uncertain times, the COVID epidemic. So not specifically the problem of COVID, but what would be your advice to the young surgeons as well as the senior people in this audience on 2 aspects? When a challenge like this faces you, or when you face a challenge like this, what should be your attitude as a person, as a surgeon? That is one. And second is, this is going to lead to a massive change in our personal as well as professional lives over a period of the next few years. So how do you prepare yourself for this change? So the current challenge and the change that is to come. What would be your suggestion, or what would be your advice for people to cope with that?
For the current scenario, I would say that COVID has taken center stage more than it deserves. Don't forget that millions of Indians die every year from tuberculosis. It never comes on your media, it never comes in your consciousness. So let us not go overboard about COVID. That is what we are doing. See the total picture, not just COVID. And I would say that we need to give much more attention to non-COVID patients than we are doing. COVID patients with malignancy, for example, who are lingering on adjuvant therapy, non-COVID patients with cardiac problems which are not being tackled. I myself have a dental problem. My PET scan has been delayed for 6 months. My ocular pressure has been not taken for 6 months because of COVID. So the general patient is also suffering just as much as the COVID patient. We are over-focused on COVID, according to me. When thousands die of malnutrition, millions die of malnutrition in this country, and it never rings a bell to anyone. But COVID has totally hypnotized and taken our That is one thing. And the second thing is that in the post-COVID era, I think we should come back to normal patient-surgeon relationship as quickly as we can. According to me, having a video conference is not a conference. A conference is a one-to-one meeting of surgeons. It is a fellowship. You cannot have fellowship over a video. And that's why we must come back to the pre-COVID era as soon as we can.
Ishwar, yeah.
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
I am Professor Ishwar from Hubli. Nice to hear you, sir. We have been hearing you since our undergraduate days and postgraduate days. When we are not yet even past our MS, when you already finished the first lab school in India, that time we used to get as a questions in the recent advances of something about the laparoscopy and pneumoperitoneum. Thanks for the changes you have done to the country and to the world to take up this laparoscopy. No, there is no question. Just I wanted to add, sir. You already said that. Sir, you have to always do surgery in our mind before putting a knife on a patient. I really agree and accept you. And then not only we do surgery twice, once in surgeon's mind and one on surgeon's body. Obviously, you are going to leave two scars, one on a patient's body and obviously one scar in our mind, so that we can intimately attach to the patient. I really appreciate your concern, the surgery. Then thank you very much, sir, for excellent.
Thank you.
Dr. Rakesh Mohan Katar, what is your question?
Yeah, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Deepraj. I wanted to ask at what age the surgeon should retire?
That is a question I am asking myself because I am 85, I'll soon be 86.
So Michael DeBakey, 92 years. Michael
DeBakey,
92 years. He died at 92, I think.
DeBakey was working till 92.
Yes.
DeBakey was a visiting professor at KM and I was a registrar.
Oh, okay. Right.
And he worked till 92. I will certainly not work till 92 because I want to play more golf. That's why I had my shoulder arthroscopy done, not for surgery, but for golf. Though the assistants used to hear the creaking of my joint and keep awake because of that when I was operating. But I think the time to retire is when the patients are asking you to retire. And I find that patients are still coming, asking for me. So I think soon they will stop asking. I will tell you one thing. If I was a patient, I would not go to an 86-year-old surgeon.
So I think I would go to an 86-year-old surgeon to get advice. I think the biggest decision for a surgeon is when not to operate. And I think the 86-year-old surgeon will probably give that advice best.
Thank you, Lina.
Any further questions from the audience? Please.
Yeah, just one question from the audience come from a couple of people, sir. What would be, if you were to summarize, what would be your, a couple of lines of advice to the young surgeons of today? What would you tell them?
Young in mind.
I would tell them to get their foundation strong, learn the surgery properly so that they have confidence. And with the confidence is added the confidence that comes from care and love of the patient, the confidence that comes from a clean, ethical practice, and the confidence that comes that they are respected in the community for what they are.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other question from the audience, please?
I have one question. I am Dr. Malik. Mr. Kumar sent me. Namaste, Professor.
Namaskar.
I'm getting trained in UK and I got through a bit of laparoscopic surgery. I want to learn robotics now. And I attended a robotic course, which is a CME course, like total mesophilic excision. I found very interesting. And is there any future for robotic surgery in upper GI, especially with Behçet's syndrome?
There is a future for robotic, but it should not be done with the idea of being one up with the Joneses. Because many people do robotic surgery because the other guy is doing robotic surgery. Many hospitals buy a robot because the other hospital got it. You must have a structured reason for robotic. According to me, the confined space of the pelvis is perhaps the best indication for a robot. I feel that for conditions in India, if you have 3D vision and if you have articulating hand instruments, you've got 80% of the benefit of a robot, provided you don't have a tremor. Or even if you have a tremor, that is reduced. So in terms of economics, in terms of versatility, you could do with these two things without having a robot. A robot is definitely of use, and it will be used more and more, but I don't think it is a necessity if you can get away with just your good laparoscopic surgery, 3D vision, and articulating hand instruments, which are now available all over.
Just one of the questions from the audience, sir. Surgeons, as they train today in India, you've said that the surgeons need to train across a wide range of sort of organ systems. Are we going to see at some point in time, like in the West, surgeons training specifically for treating diseases of organs, for example, upper GI or colorectal, or would you say that the training should be fairly broad?
You see, in the larger cities, in the metropolitan areas, it will very soon come to specific areas like colorectal surgery or upper GI. But at the same time, this will not be possible all over the country. So when you somebody, you need to specify what you're training for.
Right.
That is why our training system needs to be more modified, more malleable, more training oriented than a rigid system that it is just now.
And your take on subspecialization, super specialization, do you think an MCH degree is necessary in this era?
I think, for example, the first MCH was in gastroenterology. And I think it did a great deal of good for gastroenterology. Rangabashyam was the guy who started the first MCH. And I think the growth of gastroenterology in India was largely due to having units specializing in gastroenterology. So specific area training is like urology or plastics or thoracic. I think it is definitely of use.
Dr. Ramya Ranjan, what's your question?
Yeah, hi Ramya.
Hi sir.
Ramya is here from...
Hi Ramya.
Yes sir.
Hi Ramya, how are you? Nice seeing you.
I'm fine sir. I'm fine sir.
You remember Hinduja?
Yes, I remember every day, every moment I remember.
Ramya, what is your experience in working with the professor?
It was a great experience. I was there in 2011 to 2013. I was an FNB fellow there, and we had a great team there with Dr.
How is it different from the others?
One thing I learned from Hinduja is that if you want to excel in surgical field, you have to make a team, because single-handedly nowadays you cannot do everything. Once you have a team, good team, even if then you can go for from basic surgery to advanced surgery. And second thing, what sir always told, that there is not a good surgeon, minor surgery or a major surgery. There is always a minor surgeon or a major surgeon. So every surgery has to be done on its, every steps has to be followed, and every surgery is to be done, and everything has to be done with utmost care. So these are two things which I have learned very well from Sher, and it was a great pleasure that I worked there as a resident there.
Dr. Ashish Dey, what is that you want to say?
Good evening, sir. I have done my MS from JJ Hospital itself, so I'm an alumni of JJ. Sir, I have a question. Like there are too many articles recently that are being published in the journals. So there is a pressure to publish or perish. So too many articles that are being published which have very little relevance. Do you think, particularly with this COVID pandemic, so many articles are being published even by surgeons? So do you think there should be a cap, or there should be a way to channelize these journals or the editorial process, so that only the relevant articles could be published? And that is good for the common people also.
You see, you can't really control growth. This is a proliferation which you cannot control, but it is up to you to read them or not read them. Most of them are not worth reading. They're just put there for the sake of putting an article. That's what I said, that if you write an article, you must feel within yourself the importance of what you want to write. Only then write.
If I can turn the tables under Deepraj, I just want to know from him about his days with Professor Udvadia. How has it influenced you? How has it shaped your career? You know, we want to. It may be embarrassing for you, but we would like to hear from you.
No, I don't think, Patta, it's embarrassing at all. I think every time I spoke to Sir, I mean, I have said this often in several forums, that what I am today, and I strongly believe that for every surgeon, the 2 or 2.5 years that he spends as a resident more or less shape his career in the future. So I was very fortunate to have worked with Sir as a houseman for about 6 months in my third post. And just to give you a small example, at that time, he used to be doing diagnostic laparoscopies. And I was fascinated by diagnostic laparoscopies, and I asked my registrar, in fact, at that time. I saw Vinod's name here, Vinod Chandaramani, who's the HOD at Hinduja. His younger brother, Vijay Chandaramani, was my registrar. And I asked Vijay, I said, Vijay, I want to learn this technique. I'm fascinated by it. What should I do to learn it? Can I ask Sir to teach it to me? And his answer was that, yeah, you can try, but usually it's at the registrar level that you get to learn diagnostic laparoscopies. So one day I gathered the courage and went up to Sir and said, I want to learn this. How do I go about it? So he said, very simple. Next time I'll bring 2 articles on this subject. I'll leave them with you for a week. And the following week, I'll quiz you. I'll ask you questions on those articles on laparoscopy. And if you answer them well enough, then I will scrub with you for the next 10 diagnostic laparoscopies and I'll teach you. So that is the kind of discipline that he followed, that he would teach you, but at the same time, he would expect you to put in the efforts in learning it, in thinking about the problem, and only when he felt that you were capable of taking it forward, did he allow you to do a procedure. That was diagnostic laparoscopy. The same thing was true for open surgery also. And he was always there when we needed him to give us a hand, when we needed him to bail us out of a difficult situation. If we had a complication, it was always, he would take the responsibility and he would say that, let me help you to sort it out. So a complication was never the resident's complication. The complication was always the boss's complication. One other thing, a small incident that he has probably forgotten, and that's something that I sort of learned from him, that during my 2.5 years with him as a registrar, I got a firing from him only once.
Really?
There was something, yes, you did fire me, sir. But there was something specific about that firing.
Only once.
Only once. So there was a very specific thing about that firing, that it was not in front of all the residents, in front of the students, in front of the nurses in the ward. There was some misunderstanding. He had thought I had done something which I had not. But the way it happened, the way the conversation happened was at the end of the round, he said, we used to go in a side room and, we used to have coffee. So he said, please shut the doors. He asked all the juniors to go out. And then he gave me a dressing down. When I explained my side of things, things got sorted out. But that taught me that if you ever have to reprimand a junior, do not ever do it in front of the other people so that he feels belittled. Do it on a one-to-one basis, and at the same time, make him understand that there is a lesson in it to be learned. So I think thank you very much, sir, for all that I have learned from you, not only during the residency, but over the last 30 odd years.
I've been learning more from my registrars than I've ever taught them. And may I end up by saying one sentence? That
yes, sir.
My greatest joy and pride in life. I've been working in many hospitals. I had registrars in many hospitals for 40 years. And my greatest joy and pride in life that every one of my registrars is doing much bigger, much better surgery than I have ever done in my life. And what makes it much better is that almost all my registrars in all the various hospitals have kept a clean, honest practice. They are my pride. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. It was a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
One last question. Wilfred Lewis has raised his hand for a while. Wilfred Lewis, what is that you want to ask from the professor?
Hi. I was an anesthesia resident at JJ when Dr. Udvaria was operating in the early 90s. I wanted to ask Dr. Udvaria if there have been any patient-related events early on while you were doing your laparoscopic surgery that changed your perspectives, particularly adverse ones. Thank you.
Not really. What changed my perspective was basically laparoscopic hernia repair, where I felt that I was doing a better open repair than a laparoscopic hernia repair, mainly because at that time the equipment was primitive. That is the only change I've had. Otherwise, basically, I've been happy with laparoscopy 1972, which is a long time.
Akshay Chitnis, you want to say something?
I'm a student of Bhandarkar, sir, and I have been a student of Udvaria sir for as long as he was in Hinduja. And I'm very glad, of having met him and having performed the one Lichtenstein's procedure with sir when he was there. I was really, honored to have had that opportunity when there were so few of them at the time. And I'm actually very glad about the whole reprimanding in private thing. I've been dressed down at multiple occasions of Bhandarkar in similar fashion. So, I guess it just comes down and I learn new things.
I'm sure you'll do that too. You'll follow your boss's footsteps. Dr. Suresh, what is that you wanted to say? Dr. Suresh, please put your camera and audio on. Yeah, Dr. Suresh, you have to unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir.
Hi. Hey, Suresh.
Nice to see you virtually after many months.
Where have you been hiding, Suresh?
Hi, Suresh.
No, I was there. I was listening to you all the way. So I said I should keep a little low and I will hear the legends. Sir, I heard you last time also. Both interviews are fantastic. And I had asked you one question, and I am asking you all the time because you also innovated many things. And I want to ask you: is there a place for innovation in India? And what is your take on innovation in India?
I think the basic Indian is very innovative because he comes from a background where finance is important. So his innovation first is finance generated, and second, he has got an innovative mind. According to me, an Indian, even in the rural areas, like use mosquito net for hernia. The Indian is basically a very innovative person. And of all the innovative Indians, I think Suresh, you are the most innovative. You are a professor at IIT and a teacher in surgery, which is a fantastic combination. And if more people had as much innovation as you have, we'd be doing a lot more in terms of innovation.
Dr. Bapat, what is your comment? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, good evening, sir. It was a pleasure listening to you. And it was really fortunate to have you as your teacher from 1988 from Grand Medical College. Then I had an opportunity to work with you when I was a lecturer for 1 year and then at Hinduja. And last 1.5 hours, I have no other words, but just to say thank you. We have learned so much from you. From each word, what you have spoken is a pearl of wisdom. Thank you once again for whatever you have done to us and to our life.
But I've learned more from my residents than I've taught them.
Dr. Porus Mistry, please come.
Okay.
Unmute yourself and come, Dr. Porus.
We just wanted to say hi and thank you to Poppy.
Thank you.
We're so glad we got to hear everybody's stories because we only hear his story, so hearing everybody else's makes it so real for us.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you,
is my
Poppy.
granddaughter and my grandson-in-law.
Okay, wonderful. Nice of you.
Wonderful.
There's another gentleman with a raised hand and an iPad. I don't know the name. Please, can
Dr.
you please?
Rustam Punawala, I think.
Yeah. Please, can you can you come in, please? Yes.
Dr. Rustam, please.
Unmute yourself and come in. Okay. Meantime, I'll ask the Chief of Anesthesia, Madam, about her experience with Professor Udwadia, because I think the anesthetists are the best critics ever, like Biswarup. Madam, what are your words to talk about your days with him?
I'll put it up.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Tempen.
Hi, Lucy.
Yeah. Although I have not been your student.
Lucy is my role model, let me tell you that. He was starter of laparoscopy in India and he has always been my role model.
No, I've never been your
Pleasure and
student.
an honor to see you.
I've learned a lot from the two talks I've heard in the last week. And we have been always good colleagues and will always live as good colleagues. And what I enjoyed saying, that the students you create are the pleasure for your life, because they will be continuing what you have been doing good throughout for generations to come. Thank you, Temple.
Thank you, Lucy. It's an honor to see you here.
Madam, please come in.
Yes, then we'll conclude.
Your role model.
Madam has got to say something.
Yes.
And
Hello.
we'll continue. Yes, ma'am.
It's nice to share my views regarding this phase. Now, actually, as I said in the beginning, we went in the OT as any other routine case except with the implant. And I want to stress one thing, that we worked under a very, very compromised situation in terms of the resources, the workstation, as I said, the monitors we didn't have, and the ventilation. Now, the thing is, as I said, giving case and the training to give case, we had very, very less reasons to say no to a case that time. That's very important than I have today. Not because I didn't want to be, not because of the frugality of the taste that we had, but because of the trends that we had. That's what I want to stress. Secondly, that as I was saying, the resources that we are typically a government organization, that we are running short of all the monitors. And recently, just last week, that we had installed the pulse oximeter and the capnometer. Now, no one of them actually used to its application, to its working, to the noise that it made, and its interpretation. And it so happened that within minutes of the case, the CO2, the blood pressure, the pulse, and the IP started mounting. Well, I didn't have the guts to interrupt him and say anything. It's only when the noise of the beat that probably made him a little restless that he said, "Put it off, we don't need him." It's then that I had to say the IP is rising, the parameters are rising, including the CO2. Well, probably when that, I don't know who vented the gas and then is that the situation.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind words. And from Learning General Surgery and from all the members of Learning Surgery, all that you can tell Professor Udwadia, the whole country loves you, sir. I'm sure many would have told you time and again. And it's such a wonderful opportunity for us to have a direct communication and listen your heart. I hand over to Biswarup and Deepraj to say the final word before you close.
I've enjoyed this more than you all have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
I'd like to say a word, if I may, for a second.
Please.
Yeah, I'm from Dubai, and my family, whole family, has been patients for Dr. Udwadia, and my trust reference in whole of India. I respect everyone. I'm very honored to be listening in this session. But our trust reference in India is Dr. Udwadia, and it's really an honor to be to have known him, to have dealt with such a legend, living legend. And Doctor, I would always come to an 86 years old. Thank you.
That's the proof in the pudding, Mr. Rupas. I think, yeah.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you so much. So, thanks for those nice words.
Well, good night from all of us.
Just make one comment. I'll just make one comment.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, please.
You know, I'm not a laparoscopic surgeon, you know, like, and one of the big reasons is Sir himself. When I was a registrar at Beach Candy, I told him, I said, you know, I want to be a cardiac surgeon, and my second choice is upper GI surgery. And we were walking on the corridor. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, there are no second choices, boy. And I just adhered to it. And with his encouragement, you know, I've achieved that dream of being a cardiac surgeon. And he's still, though he's not a cardiac surgeon, but he is my all-time surgical mentor.
I think with these wonderful words and a wonderful evening we have spent with Professor Udwadia, I think we have spent a good 2 hours. Thanks, Vishwarup. Thanks, Dr. Bhandarkar, and many thanks, Professor. We wish you a long and happy life, and we hope we'll come back again on this platform another day. Thank you so much.
Thank everyone who has organized this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. More than you all. And I've met and seen so many of my old colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks everyone. Good night. Have a nice Sunday.
Thank you.